In this tutorial, I'll be showing you various color grading options that are available to you in Phase 1's Capture One Pro 8. Hi again, Michael Volshinovich here from VibrantShot. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/VibrantShot and also at vibrantshot.com. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you a couple of different options that you have available as far as color adjustments and color grading go in Phase 1's Capture One Pro 8. Now we're going to be using this image here, which I have retouched to the extent that I've done some dodging and burning and some healing on it directly inside of Capture One. So if we revert these changes, you'll see that this is sort of the original portrait, and this is the portrait after I've polished up a little bit with some of these different adjustment layers. I do talk about this process in a previous tutorial. I'll show the link to that tutorial down here below, where I go into dodging and burning for portraits, and you can see how that all got created inside of there. So our focus here is really on adjusting the colors here, maybe changing some of the colors, and then grading the image. So when you're doing this inside of Photoshop, you basically have two options. You can either apply grading on a luminosity basis, so you can adjust your highlights, shadows, midtones separately and apply color casts to each of those, or you can target individual colors and adjust them. So if you use a tool like selective color in Photoshop, then you can grab an individual color and adjust that color itself. So we're going to look at sort of both approaches inside of Capture One, and you can sort of ultimately choose what you think works best for you. And for me personally, I find a combination of all of the options really is nice for creating a good quality, clean color grade. So we're going to start off on this end here, which is where a lot of the color adjustments are done. So in the colors tab, we have a couple of options for us. We have this color balance tool, and we have the color editor. White balance, obviously, I wouldn't call it a color grading tool because it's more of a correction tool. Now, in our case for this image here, we see that we probably could adjust the white balance a little bit because the whole image looks a little bit green, a little bit yellow. So that's really just a Kelvin and a tint adjustment. But I want to kind of use that to show you what you can do with the color balance. So in general, the color balance is designed to add a color cast to your image. Now, we're going to use that color cast to offset some of the color issues that we have with this image in the first place. So if we go around this circle, we see a variety of different colors. We've got, yellow here, green, cyan, blue, and then we've got, magentas and reds and orange. So if we think that our image has a greenish yellow color cast, we're sort of in this corner of things. So what we can do is just take the center point and drag it to the opposite side of that to offset it. So we're just going to grab that and we're going to drag it down and sort of into here. And to see whether or not that's helped, hold down the Option or Alt key and then click on the Revert button here. So this is our original, and this is where we're at now. So it's very subtle adjustment, but as you can see, we've offset that greenish tint that we have to it a little bit, and I think overall it looks much better. So that's, again, you should be probably doing that with white balance, but I think this is a good example of showing you how that works. Now, you really only need to make very small changes there. You can fine tune that a bit using this dial here too. So we can, for example, take that to 2% if we want to push that a little bit more, and I think that's probably a bit too much. So I'm going to just go back to the 1% that we had here before. So that's all I really use color balance for, is if there's kind of a weird cast that I'm having trouble removing with white balance, I do like to use it to offset that. But in general, not a tool I use all the time. I generally have, my preference is to use color editors, levels, and curves for things. So another thing we're going to do here is go ahead and tweak this shirt color here, because I think it's a little bit overpowering, so it's a good opportunity for us to look at some adjustment layers. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new adjustment layer inside my local adjustments tab. And so we just want a new layer here, and we'll call it top. And what I'm going to do is going to go ahead and select invert mask, and that's going to make my entire layer filled. So by default, the layer is unfilled. I want it filled because I want to pretty much target everything except for the eyes with this adjustment. Since they're blue, I don't want them to change. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit the M key, and that's going to show us our mask. And then we're going to use the Erase Mask tool. Let's just go ahead and crank up our opacity to 100 and we're just going to go ahead and brush out our eyes because we don't want them affected. So now essentially everything is going to get affected with the exception of our eyes. So that's good enough. You don't have to be, super precise with this. Really, and nothing else is going to get affected because nothing else is blue. So we can hit the M key again. That's going to take us out of our mask, and then we're going to go into our advanced section here, and we're going to go ahead and pick our shirt color. So grab the blue color there, and if we want, we can stretch this out a little bit more to affect sort of a broader range of blues. Pull this out a tiny bit just to be on the safe side, and now we can just kind of adjust the saturation, take that down. We can also lighten or darken it. I personally don't think I want to do either. I'm going to leave the luminosity level unchanged, and then we can change the hue as well. So we can shift it in this direction, which is going to give us more of a green tone, and then if we go in this direction, it's going to give us more of a bluish tone, kind of a magenta tone. So you can always tell which direction you're going just by looking at the circle. So if you start pulling it this way, you can imagine that this guy's going to start twisting clockwise, and if you go this way, it's going to start twisting counterclockwise. So I'm going to actually pull it a little bit this way and give it a bit of a green tone. I think that green tone is going to blend better with sort of the background and the image is going to stand out less. So that's our adjustment on that. If we want to see what that's doing, we can just kind of turn that off, turn it back on, and you can see that that's just sort of muting that top down. So the next thing I want to do is start playing with some of these individual colors in my shadows and my highlights and sort of neutralizing some of the things that are going on here. So I'm going to go back into my exposure section, and we're going to start off with levels. And I'm going to actually use levels to get us to a nice neutral baseline, and then we'll use curves to add a little bit more styling. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these individual colors here and start playing with those. So if we feel that the entire background here is feeling a bit green, we can offset that by modifying these are obviously shadows, so we're going to modify this end here to take that away. So if we actually start nudging this guy this way, we're going to add more green, and that's obviously not what we want. So we're going to use the bottom end of it here, and this is actually going to remove green and add magenta. So if we shift this a little bit, and you can see it's cranking up the magenta in the shadow. So obviously we don't want that much, but finding sort of a happy amount here, probably at 1 or 2. Even 1 I think is enough to offset some of the green that was in there. Now the whole background is feeling a little bit too red to me, I think. We've added some magenta, so it also feels a little bit red. So let's go back to our reds and see if we can play with those. So now we're going to be adding cyan if we start moving this. So over here at 3 or 2, it's not looking too bad, I don't think. 2 is pretty safe. I think 3 is starting to apply a little bit of color grading, but I think I'm pretty happy with having it there. So I think my shadows are actually looking pretty good now. We can play with our blue, but I don't think there's really an issue with blue. I mean, if we want to add a little bit of yellow maybe into there, we can just nudge this guy to 1. That actually takes it to a fairly neutral level, I think. Let's just go ahead and see here. So what I'm basically doing is I'm kind of hovering over the background and I'm looking at the RGB values up here. So if I actually look at this, we can see that our RGB, we have more red than we have green, and then we have more green than we have blue. So what we can do is we can sort of add blue or take away blue depending on what you think is going to look good. So let's just take blue to somewhere around 1. And then take a look at that. And as you can see, they're kind of all nudging closer together. So we've got a fairly neutral background here, and I think that looks good. And now we can start playing with the highlights. So depending on how you like your highlights to look, I think they're pretty close to what I want them to be, but we can, for example, warm them up a little bit by nudging the top slider here, and it's going to add more yellow to our highlights. So let's go ahead and just add a bit there. And then on green, let's see what we get here. So this is going to add some magenta for us into our highlights, and I don't think I particularly like that. Let's see if we want to add some green to our highlights. Again, I don't think that that's really looking good. Let's check red. So now we're going to be pushing some cyan into our highlights by using the top slider, and actually I don't really mind that too much, so I'm going to probably leave that around there. Now I think that actually gets us to a pretty good point where I think the image looks nice and pleasing in a neutral form. Like there's not a ton of color grading applied, but I think everything looks natural and clean. So at this point, what I often do is go in and start playing with the skin tone a little bit. So we can go back into our color editor, and I'm going to use my advanced section here. I do use the skin tone section, but I use it primarily for uniformity. Because it's targeting a fairly broad range, which we want for uniformity. We want to target, anywhere from yellow to red because we want to bring those colors closer together. So that's why I like to use skin tone for uniformity. But what I want to do when I make, let's say, a saturation adjustment, I don't want to do that on this broad range because then it's going to change the saturation of everything. And in my case, what I really want to do is I want to target more the yellow tones so I can just take a little bit of saturation out of those. So for that, I'm going to use the Advanced tab. And using the color picker, we're going to sample any skin tone as a starting point. So let's go ahead and just grab a slice there. And then we're going to adjust this little section to tighten it up a tiny bit. So we're going to just use this little circle to pull it out, and that will just broaden our saturation range. And then we're going to bring this in and reduce our smoothness, which will essentially take down the feather between colors here. And then again, I'm just going to reduce the size of this slice. So it's really just targeting orange and yellow, and move it somewhere like that. So what I basically want to do is I want to fix two things here. I think on the skin tone, I want to fix a saturation level to give it a little bit more of a fashion portrait kind of feel. I think it's still a little too saturated for a fashion portrait. And I also want to fix the hue. So from a hue standpoint, I think it's a little bit too magenta still. So we're going to use our hue rotation option. So if we take it this way, obviously we're going to add more magenta, which we certainly don't want. If we nudge it this way, we're going to add more green, which is what I want. So back over here is sort of our starting point. So we're going to just kind of keep nudging this until we think it looks good. And personally, I think around 2 is a good level. I think it's going to neutralize that magenta tint that we had to our skin. And now I'm going to nudge down the saturation slider to desaturate it a bit. So obviously going too far, and we can see that it's not looking too good. So we want to make a fairly subtle adjustment here. I think probably minus 5 or so should be good. Yeah, that I think looks good to me. So just turning this on and off, there is the before and there's the after. So as you can see, fairly subtle adjustment, but that's generally how I tend to adjust the skin tone, through a combination of having a yellow slice and a red one. Now in this case, I don't really need to change anything in the red colors. Red colors being things like the lips or around here in the cheekbones where the blush usually is. So if you need to change the reds, just create another slice in the same manner, just sample and then tighten up the slice so it only covers this sort of thin area and make an adjustment on that. So now that we've got a fairly, I think, clean image that, is sort of a neutral baseline, we can go back into our exposure section here, and this is where we can apply some more drastic grading to our image. Now, first thing I want to do, I think, is boost the contrast. And again, since my level slider was more for, establishing a baseline, I try not to make adjustments on it. I try and keep it as sort of my clean baseline. But to be honest with you, I really like the way you can adjust contrast through levels. So we're going to do that here anyway. So we're going to use these outer points on our RGB tab. Make sure you're not in the individual colors because we don't want to change colors in this case. We just want to change overall luminosities on the highlights and shadows. So I'm going to use this. Now, you're probably wondering why I don't just increase the contrast slider. And the reason for that is I don't really like the end result from moving the contrast slider. I find it increases saturation a little bit too much. And so I prefer to just do that using either levels or curves. So we're just going to reset this. And what we can do on levels is if we actually use the top ones, these are more the recovery tab. So if we find that we want to shift our histogram on the highlight end to the left and try and get rid of some clipped highlights, we can use this top one. As you can see, that's going to push our histogram to the left, and that's actually going to take contrast out for us, which we don't actually want. What we want to do is we want to boost the contrast. So we're going to use the bottom end here, and that's going to shift our histogram over to the right and just essentially increase the highlights in our image. So I'm going to move it over a little bit here. As you can see, we've already boosted our highlights pretty dramatically. So maybe that's a little too much. Let's just take it to around there. And we're going to also use curves to adjust contrast. So let's just get sort of to a halfway point here with levels, and then we're going to go back to the curve. Now I want to do the same thing with shadows. And a lot of people complain that you can't take the shadow slider negative like you can in Lightroom. It really doesn't matter, because the best way to do that is to just use the opposite end on levels here, just on the shadow end. We're going to take this slider and we're going to nudge it, and that's going to basically pull the histogram to the left as well, and that's going to just sort of deepen our blacks. If you use the top one, again, that will lighten the blacks, shift the entire histogram to the right. So we're going to do this just a little bit, probably 3 or 2, just to give us a little bit more drama, and I think that's pretty good. Let's just go ahead and see what our levels is doing in our image in general. So this is where our image started by holding down Alt and Option, or Alt or Option, that's what I'm doing here, and just kind of using the revert key. So going back, this is where we started. This is what it's doing for us. So you can see what a big difference just making that levels adjustment has done. Now we're going to go into here and apply some more dramatic color grading. So first thing we can do is, again, just tweak our contrast a little bit. We're going to create a little bit of an S curve here. We're going to bring up our highlights, bring down our shadows. So that's, again, just deepening the shadows and sort of brightening up the highlights for us. Again, creating more contrast. Now, in that process, we've probably introduced a little bit more saturation than I'd like. So we can just offset that by lowering global saturation back down. And we're going to go in to our individual colors and start playing with them. So if we want something that, for example, has a little bit of yellow in the highlights, we can just take this end here, maybe pull that down. So now our highlights have a little bit of yellow, and we can start playing with the shadows and injecting a little bit of blue into those. Maybe something like this here. Always fun trying to get the exact number that you want. And then let's go into our greens. Let's see if we want to add or take away any magenta in the shadows. Maybe something like that. There we go. So let's say you want something that is a little bit more stylized. You can just kind of keep playing with those points. We could go into the red and start playing with it as well. We can drop a point in the middle, start increasing and decreasing those colors on the midtones. But this is kind of giving you an idea. It's the same process that we would take inside of Photoshop, except we're using the curve directly inside Capture One. So again, the reason I try and separate those is because I know that at this point, I've gotten to here and I don't really like the way it looks. I've gone too far with my color grading. I can always revert this and go right back to my original sort of neutral level that I liked. So that was something like this. And then I had obviously a little bit of contrast in here as well, which I have to now rebuild. But as you can see, really easy to restore that point that I was happy with and try again. Whereas if we start messing around with levels and curves and doing our neutral point with both, then it's hard to get back to that neutral point if we decide that we don't really like where we're at. So I use levels to get me to where my tones are fairly neutralized and everything looks natural, and then any additional color grading I want to apply, I do that with my curve. So basically this is where I'm going to leave the image. I personally don't like to add a ton of stylized kind of colors to my image, but as you can see, you can certainly do that using the RGB sections of the curve here. So if we compare this to our original image, which is this one here, this is where we started, and this is where we're at. So as you can see, just has a lot more contrast. The tones are a lot more pleasing, and I think the subject just pops out of the image much better than before. So thanks for watching, and be sure to check out my full-length course on fashion photography and retouching at RGG.edu via the link below, and also subscribe to this YouTube channel so you get more updates just like this one. We'll see you next time.